It is Tuesday, December the 3rd, 2019, and it is about 8:30 p.m. And welcome to week 5 of Introduction to Criminal Law. And I'm Professor Richard Wright, and I'm going to take the next maybe hour to 40-some minutes and go over some details and information about the assignments and the requirements for this week. First thing I'm going to tell you is that if you scroll down and look at the fact that we have one more lecture to go, and that's next week. And then we will be completed. This course will end next week, at the end of the week. So we're just about done. So you see I have recordings for 1, 2, 3, 4, and we'll have 5. I also want to remind you that your rubrics are located in each written assignment, except the discussion rubric, which is one we use all the time. So let's take a look at the recording for this week and the announcements. So in this week, we're going to deal with crimes against moral values. And I provided you with Chapter 7 of the textbook, A Brief Introduction to Criminal Law. And you should have read Chapter 7, or should read Chapter 7. We're going to discuss drug laws, drunk and drug driving, distracted driving, hate crimes, and then I'll show you how to do the key term for practice and dealing with the practice quiz as well. As you know, there will be another quiz next week that will be basically your final exam. So this week, be sure to participate in the discussion assignment, drunk driving. The initial post is due tonight at 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. Reply post Saturday, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard. And finally, complete the written assignment. Has a hate crime been committed? And I'll go over the details of that in a minute. And then you know what my motto is: adversity is a springboard to success. I have encouraged you since the beginning to be strong, and then remind you that we're near the finish and you want to finish strong as well. Be aware of the fact that assignments from week 1 through 3 will not be accepted anymore, and assignments 4, 5, and 6 are the only assignments, and you will lose points unless you have extenuating circumstances as to why your assignment is late from weeks 4, 5, and 6. So now let's go and let's take a look at the course calendar. And this is the course calendar. So you see this is where we are at week 5. So your initial post is due tonight. The live lecture is taking place now. The reply post is due Saturday. And then Sunday, your written assignment is due along with your key phrase. And then you see also that the 13th is the last day of class. All assignments will be done and completed. By the way, just for your information, final grades will be posted by the 16th, that following Monday. So that weekend I will be very busy. So that's our course calendar. And you see we're at the end. So now let's take a look at the module, starting out by going over the assignments, the discussion assignment, and it's self-explanatory. You deal with this fact pattern here, and then your initial reply, consider the scenario and the criminal law elements of impaired driving discussed in the lesson this week, and answer the following questions. So it's very important. And then your reply post, look at another student's post and contrast with yours. Defend your position regarding the questions that you addressed in the initial post. And then we get to the written assignment, which, again, before I get into the rubric, crimes against moral values, exploration of victimist crimes of drug and alcohol abuse, and to more violent hate crimes that are committed against certain classes of people. So this is a three-part assignment. In this assignment, you will play three different roles. One as a police officer, one as a defense attorney, and one as a detective. I have pretty much played the first two roles. Detective I've not done, but defense attorney and prosecutor, and police officer I have. So you're going to look at part one. It's going to be one page with citations in the body and references at the end. Remember that. And address the following in a minimum of one page. These are the three issues that relate to the first scenario. In the second scenario, you go over this scenario and then answer the following, a minimum of one page. Then finally, the third scenario, detective perspective. You're going to look at the scenario and you're going to deal with the facts that are in here, and you're going to deal with these two issues. Make sure you have citations in the body and references at the end. Okay, very important, very important. And then again, to help you with your assignments, I have encouraged you to use the guides. This is in every week's assignment to help you to get your work done dealing with APA, tutoring and writing, and other things that will provide you with a complete assignment. So then we click on this, and our rubric pops up, which tells us the due date. And we open it up, and there it is again. And it tells you from the police officer's perspective what you have to do, from the defense attorney's perspective, and from the detective. Make sure you separate them. Don't run them all together. Okay, double space, people, not single space. You will lose points if it's single space. And then you're going to satisfy, of course, paragraphs, spelling, typos. I read all of that. And then your APA requirements. Okay, and that's for that. Okay, and then you have your live lecture, which I'll give you a key word or phrase tonight that you'll be able to get these points on, and that's due on Sunday as well. Okay, so let's go to the lesson content. So again, you're reading, you know what that is. We're going to talk about drug laws, drunk and drug driving, distracted driving, and hate crimes. And then I'll close by showing you how these items work in terms of helping you. And just to show you how you can be prepared for the final exam or the next exam that comes up. So drug laws. I teach a course which some of you are in. It's called it's called Drugs and Crime, and it's J250. And in that course, we talk extensively about drugs. And I constantly remind students that there is a correlation between drugs and crime, and that a lot of crime is committed by individuals who are seeking to take care of their drug habits. And so tonight we're going to kind of like touch on some of the things that we deal with drugs. We won't stay on it long. So A person who uses drugs apparently doesn't hurt anybody else, so it is said. But again, I remind you that they hurt their own physical body as well as their family, their neighbors, their friends, and it just goes on and on and on. And then the use of these drugs create health hazards for individuals. Many people who are involved in utilizing these drugs utilize the same needles, and AIDS and all other kinds of sicknesses are in the body. And also the drugs that are used contain all kinds of chemicals and things like even drain cleaner and stuff that you use to for animals, like there's a drug that's used for elephants, and it ends up in the drugs that people take into their body. And so some people believe that everybody, you know, who uses drugs, that that shouldn't be laws to be legislated against it. Well, be aware of the fact that because of the health hazards and because of the impact that these individuals who are involved in this activity, and I'm not talking about the individuals who are dealers. I'm at this point just talking about the individuals who are users, and it creates a lot of harm, as I said, to those people. It says here that there are no victims in a traditional sense when it comes to drug use, possession, or sale. However, there are instances when innocent people are harmed by drug-related crime. As I said, for example, an innocent bystander who is caught in the crossfire. In drug wars, gangs use guns to protect their territory, and they will shoot innocent individuals. I once had a young man that I represented years and years ago when I was practicing, and I asked him a question about why did he shoot this person who really was an innocent person, and he said that he had to shoot them because they were in the way for him to shoot the person he really needed to shoot. Now, that's just ridiculous, but that's how it worked. That's the mentality and the mindset that's involved. And so innocent individuals are killed. Even people are in their own homes. Guns are used, and bullets penetrate through the walls and the windows where people are either working at home, watching television, or just sitting at home talking. In addition, the crimes that take place to support drug habits, such as robbery, where a person is trying to get what they need to support their habit. I had a young man that I represented many years ago, another client, who he had a serious drug problem, and this young man was also convicted of burglary many times. Well, the reason for that is because he would steal things, sell them to support his habits. Well, it cost him his life. I found that he had committed, he was being charged with burglary, and generally I recommend to people to get my clients out if they can. Well, I recommended to this family that they leave him in place, because if he got out, there was a possibility that he would go back to committing a habit, in a crime, to support his drug habit. Well, they went over what I said. They decided to do their own thing, and they got him out. Well, a few days after he was out, he escaped from the house. Of course, he wasn't chained or anything like that, but he got out of the house, and he ended up crossing a highway from where he lived to the other side of town to commit a burglary. Well, a chase ensued where the police were after him, and he tried to get back home and tried to go back across that highway again, and he was killed because he was hit by numerous vehicles. And I'll never forget that as long as I live. And it was the drugs. It was his habit that created the death that he ended up with, trying to support that habit. So drugs will create that problem. So because of that, we want to regulate drugs, and so there was in the early 1900s, as it says here, the Uniform Controlled Substance Act of 1970, about a year after I came out of high school, to classify drugs into categories. And you see that Schedule 1 drugs, for example, some examples are heroin, LSD, ecstasy, and marijuana. And highly potential for abuse, no accepted medical use in the United States, and lack of demonstrated safety under medical supervision. Well, Schedule 1 is being modified and changed because one of the drugs that's in there, the last one, marijuana, is being legalized, as you all know, all across the country. In fact, Illinois will have recreational marijuana legalized beginning the 1st of 2020, January 1st, 2020. And there are places popping up all over the area where people are preparing to be able to dispense this. California has already had it, as well as one of the earlier states is Colorado, and I believe Massachusetts is another state. But the truth of the matter is that marijuana will probably be removed from Schedule 1. But the reason why these drugs are placed there is because of the effects that it still has on individuals. Heroin and other opioids, when you take that J250 course, you see the effects that it has on individuals and how people are hurt constantly because of the use of heroin, and is now at an epidemic stage. And there are law enforcement people who carry around what we call, you know, the EpiPen that people use for allergies. Well, now they got a thing called Noxolone or Narcan, which is carried around by first responders and utilized when individuals take too much heroin. And what this Noxolone does, or either the Narcan, is that it stops the effects of the drug in the body. The only problem is that, number one, it's a very expensive thing. It can be taken by injection in the body, and now they have a form that you can nasally take it just like you do an antihistamine. And what it does is it has helped people. But again, the number one thing that's going to help people is help, as you learn when you take that other class. So then in Schedule 2, and notice something else. Now, marijuana has a medical use for glaucoma. For years, it's been commonly known that it's been used for that. And so, let's see, I want to go back and see what that comment was. I can't see it. Let me put it up here. Google methadone mile in Boston, Massachusetts is a total nightmare over in there. Yeah, I know. If you see what is in Chasing the Dragon, which is a video that you could go and take a look at, Okay, see a video entitled Chasing the Dragon. And in that movie, you will see where there is a serious problem like what you're talking about. And yeah, it results in people who are homeless and not able to support. And let me tell you something. There are even people who were quote professionals who found themselves in that situation. There is a site that one of my students brought to my attention in the drugs and crime course that covered something that the president put together and dealing with the heroin epidemic, and it actually has many stories in there about individuals and their battles with drugs. One of them is a famous baseball player by the name of Darryl Strawberry, who had some very serious drug problems, and he shared his experiences with drugs. But so it's a real serious problem. So then we get to Schedule 2, which is oxycodone, fentanyl, opium, and cocaine. Be aware of the fact that cocaine is very dangerous, and also you can find a cheap form of cocaine called crack cocaine, where that is cooked up on a stove, and it then the water leaves, and then it leaves little rocks, and people buy these rocks for $5, $10, $20, and up, and they inject these things into their body through needles. They snort it, and you see here in this picture here how it's in a spoon. Even not that they eat it, but what they do is they take it and melt it down to a liquid and inject it in their bodies using needles. And again, I already talked about using the same needles. So Schedule 2 are drugs that are highly potential for abuse, but they have acceptable medical use, but with restrictions, and could lead to psychological or other dependence. You will find that painkillers will fit in this category, and you can take them. For example, I know my wife, she takes ibuprofen, which she doesn't abuse it, but there are people who have, believe it or not, have offered her $25 for a pill to sell because of the fact that on the streets the value of that, and it's ridiculous. But so anyway, these drugs are put on Schedule 3. Lower potential for abuse, may lead to moderate psychological, such as Tylenol with codeine, Suboxone, ketamine, and anabolic steroids. All these different things are things that can affect the body in an adverse fashion. Then we move on down to Schedule 4, where we deal with Valium and these kinds of drugs that will sedate you and also cause you to go on a trip sometimes, and sometimes you never make it back. Schedule 5, cough suppressant medication with codeine. There are people who actually would drink this syrup, they call it. I had a young man that I knew when I was about 19 years old, and he worked in the mailroom with me at the law firm when I was first starting out. And this young man's name was Marvin, and Marvin was known to have in his possession cough syrup, and he would drink it, and that was one of the things that he did. And then he would like go into like he'd go to sleep. He would be talking to you, and eventually he ran into some other issues. I lost contact with him years and years ago. I don't even know if he's still alive now, but it's a very dangerous thing. And so the laws have been passed to crack down on these things, and discussing the war on drugs, which happened in the 80s, and it's going on today. But I tell you, dealing with drug cartels and other distributors of drugs, but I can tell you this, that there is a very serious problem. The war on drugs is something that we are not winning, and it's just getting out of hand. It says in the 80s and 90s, crack cocaine was a crystal-like rock that contained 80% pure cocaine and appeared on the streets. I was the village attorney in a town called Ford Heights in the Chicago area, a southeast suburb, and it was known as the crack cocaine capital of the south suburbs because there were many houses in the community that blew up or exploded because they were crack houses, and people were cooking up crack in these, and there was a distribution. And so a lot of very serious problems came about because of that. It says, "Just say no to drugs" became a slogan that was aimed towards trying to pressure drug users. And I tell people, drug users can't say no. They have to be able to be delivered. They have to get, as we use the term, the monkey off their back, so that they can get their free will, because their free will is taken away. And you know, the sad part about it is when I was in law enforcement, I learned that with crack cocaine, for example, what people would do is that they would get a high, and then they would try to duplicate that high, and the way that they tried to do it was to increase the amount of drug. And oftentimes what would happen is, if you saw pictures of it, which we saw in some training films, where the individual's heart in their bodies literally, like a balloon, exploded, and that caused the instant death of those individuals. And so it became a very serious issue, and it still is. Again, as I said, now it's elevated in terms of dealing with the use of narcotics like heroin and oxycodone and all of these different things that are creating problems where people are overdosing in huge numbers. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about that. And you can look at and see what the possession of some of these were, and dealing with what we call actual possession, where a person has it on their physical body, and then there's constructive possession, where the person has the right or ability to control the item, not on their person. For example, a pipe within a car, or you're a passenger in a car, and you have these things. But be aware of the fact, as I had clients that learned the hard way, that when you are the owner or driver of that vehicle, particularly the driver, and someone in your car has these items, then you can potentially be charged with possession, even though it's not on you, because of the fact that it's in the vehicle operated by you. Same thing in your home, those kind of things. And so there are some various laws, and I'm not going to go over all of these, but the point of the matter is the goal of all of these laws is to try to, how should I say, get people not to use these drugs. But again, and the sale and distribution of large quantities results in more jail time. But the biggest offenders that end up in drug court are users. And unfortunately, without the help to get them some help with these drugs, there are problems that will continue. I always say, and in teaching that other class, that it is not a criminal law issue. It is a health issue, and as a result, you learn, as my students so Wright correctly pointed out, is that it results in people being homeless and other problematic situations for people. Okay. So now I'm going to move from that into what we call DUIs, or driving under the influence, or what we call drunk driving or drugged driving. So in the years that I started practicing law, it used to be that if you took a breathalyzer and you blew 0.10 or higher, you were deemed to be driving under the influence. But because of the fact there were many deaths that resulted from individuals driving under the influence of alcohol, it began to change. And as you can see in the second paragraph, the legal limit was 0.10, but then because so many people were killed, it was reduced by federal law to 0.08 blood alcohol content, which means that if you blew on the breathalyzer a 0.08 and a 0.10 back in the old days, then you could end up finding yourselves losing your license. And it was designed not just to punish people, but also to take people to the understanding that they were jeopardizing their lives, their passengers' lives, pedestrian lives, potential damage to property, and just a whole myriad of things. And so it is a tough thing. When I was practicing, I had people who had DUIs, and they would sometimes try to be smart and not take the breath test. But most jurisdictions had it that if you didn't take the breath test, then your license was suspended automatically, because what you did was you took away the ability of the prosecution to be able to prove that you were driving under influence or you were driving illegal per se. And so the numbers are up. There's so many organizations. There's MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and other organizations where people who have lost loved ones because of individuals driving under the influence. And so it says here that in all 50 states, a person is operating a motor vehicle upon a highway, road, parking lot, or driveway accessible to the public while impaired by alcohol. You should be aware of the fact that even if you're not driving and you're sitting behind the wheel, and there are keys in the vehicle present, whether they're in the ignition or not, you can be charged with driving under the influence if you pass out. I know a famous baseball player who was found passed out in a cornfield, and the car was off, but the keys were right there, and he was charged with driving under the influence. And so the key thing is that what we're trying to do with these laws is to help people to understand that that vehicle that they're driving for transportation purposes becomes a potential weapon that can kill people and or destroy property. So look at what it says here. It says states have laws that make it illegal for a person to be under physical control while under the influence. And it talks about this Ohio law where physical control while under influence makes it illegal for an impaired person to be in physical control. And this is what it means. Being in the driver's position in the front seat or in the driver's position of a streetcar or a trackless trolley, and having possession of the vehicles or streetcars, ignition keys, or other ignition devices. And the point of the matter is that having control over them means sometimes that it's right there. It's not even in the ignition. And so, and the point of the matter is because you can potentially start that vehicle up and drive it. Okay. Now, there are people that I know, and I represented one young man who was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter because he was driving under the influence, and one of his best friends, who was a childhood friend, was killed as being a passenger in the car with him. And he ended up not going to jail because I settled with a conference, what we call a 402 conference plea bargaining, where I worked it out that he needed to get help, and that he was required to participate in a program, and he was also, his license were taken away, of course, and it was problematic. But you can end up going to jail. So homicide by driving under influence was when a person operates the vehicle while under the influence of a drug or alcohol with a blood alcohol content of now, as I say, 0.08, is when the driver is considered impaired. And then it caused the death of a person. Okay. So I'm not going to cover this. Notice this, is that there are times when you've seen this as a driver, a person driving down the street, and you can see that there is some issue that's happening with an individual. For example, I remember driving down a busy street, and I saw a car real late at night, and it was striking the curb on one side, going over to the other side of the street where the traffic was going the opposite direction. And thank God there was no traffic coming. And so I called the police and told them about where this vehicle was, and they ended up apprehending the person. Somebody says, well, why did you interfere? Because someone could have been killed, including that individual. But you'll see this kind of behavior demonstrated by weaving, driving through a traffic signal, striking a curb, like what I said. Driver's physical appearance, you can look at people and tell. You can smell it. And their speech. Now, slurred speech is very interesting. I know of an instance of an individual who was charged with a DUI because of his speech, and they thought they smelled alcohol on the individual, but what really was happening is that that person was diabetic, and it gave the appearance, the smell was like, but what that person was doing was having a stroke, and they had slurred speech. And the police arrested them, charged them, and then it was later, of course, found that that person was not guilty of driving under the influence. But it happens often. And so then we have these various tests that they have you to do, field sobriety tests, and we have had to administer them and seen them administered where people do all kinds of things. The one leg stand is the one interesting one, or walk on the line, and the person begins to walk on the line, and you can tell clearly that there is a problem there. So these are some of the things that we look at, and then there's some more details here that are involved. This is what I was talking about earlier when I said that states have implied consent laws, which arrested impaired drivers are given the option to consent to chemical tests, breathalyzers, blood draws, and if you decide that you're not going to do that, then the penalty is not only increased, but you can end up losing your license, And if you refuse, law enforcement officer can proceed with the evidentiary chemical test. They would have to get a warrant. And this was established in the famous case of Missouri versus McNeely because it was intrusive for an individual to be able to do that. So what they would have to do is arrest that individual, take them into custody, and then go get a warrant and then be able to conduct the test. But prior to McNeely, a law enforcement officer could force a blood draw. But after McNeely and today, law enforcement officers have to get a warrant in order to do a blood draw, unless that person, as I say, gives consent. Unless there is some exigent situation, circumstance that require immediate action, but that's a burden that the law enforcement people have to establish. So now let's talk about drug driving. The effect of drug driving is sometimes you don't blow in terms of percentage, but the key thing is that you're still operating a vehicle while impaired. And it's difficult to determine whether a person is driving under drugs. Now, it could be legal drugs as well as illegal drugs that we're talking about. For example, if you pay attention carefully to most prescription drugs, there is a disclaimer that is put on these, and that's to protect the manufacturer, to let you know that when you take these drugs that you could possibly have some problems with driving. And they might say they recommend not driving after taking this medication. I take what's called a amlodipine, and it's for my blood pressure, and that's the only medication I take. And the point of the matter is, it says it on there. Well, I've been taking it for years and years and years. I've never had any problem with it, but it's still on there, nevertheless. So to deal with this issue, there is what they call the drug recognition experts, or DREs, that's what we call them, where they study carefully how to identify people who are drug impaired. And they actually will testify in court concerning a determination that a person was driving under the influence. So here's a video that's about a half an hour long, and you can take a look at it, and you can learn more about that on your own time. And so that's all I'm going to say about that. So now let's talk about distracted driving. Well, one of the #1 things that people are told about distracted driving involves texting, being on the phone while driving a vehicle. As you know, in most jurisdictions, including ours, Illinois, it is illegal to have your hands on your phone while driving. But how many times do you drive down the street and you see people who are texting, they're talking, they have their phone up to their ear? And even now, like in my car, I have a hands-free system that is based on Bluetooth, and I can talk to a person while driving. But here's the problem that I try to explain to people, is that do you not know that you could be involved in a hands-free situation and still be distracted, because while you're talking to that individual, you're focusing on what they're saying, but it can also take your mind off of what's happening in terms of accidents. Now, texting is a common way that accidents happen, and young people especially are guilty of doing this. And notice distracted driving, it says here, is any activity that diverts your attention from driving, such as even talking, texting on your phone, eating and drinking. A lot of people didn't know that. You know, I see people eating all the time while driving, and I do it. But the point of the matter is that you can find yourself even messing with your radio or your entertainment system, or even your GPS system that takes your attention away from the driving. And so there is a high percentage of teen drivers, and it is reflected in your insurance rates. My insurance rates for 2 cars that I own is less than the amount for full coverage that my son, who's 19, and my daughter, who's 20, would get on their own cars because of their ages. And the reason is because statistics have demonstrated that teen driving is one of the major causes of accidents. Now, I will say this, that between males and females, that statistically, it's not based on discrimination, that males are often guilty of committing accidents more than females. Now that's a statistic, but it also determines your insurance rates and things of that nature. I don't allow my kids to drive my car, and I bought a car for my wife, and we both have the same policy. And she's older, like I am. She's younger, but she's still up there in age. She's old enough to have a 24-year-old son, which is our oldest son. The point of the matter is that our driving is good, and our rates are lower because of our age, and the propensity for not causing accidents is very low. So anyway, distracted driving, together with dealing with drunk driving, drug driving, is a problem that creates high insurance rates, and there's a tremendous number of injuries that take place over that as well. Remember, these are safety laws we're talking about. That's pretty much what we're talking about, safety laws tonight. So now I want to talk about, I think this is it. The last thing I want to talk about are hate crimes. Now, what is a hate crime? Well, let me just put it to you this way. If you commit a crime against an individual because of their race, their sex, their national origin, or sexual preference, or a disability, and that it's quite clear based upon all the surrounding circumstances, that will elevate a crime that would consider to be a misdemeanor to a felony. And the reason for that is because of the fact that we want to protect individuals from being terrorized by anyone because of their race, religion, sexual, national origin, or sexual preference. LGBT people are the target now of many of these types of crimes. People commit crimes because of the race of an individual. Unfortunately, the hate crime statistic has increased in the last 2 years. And it's already said that it coincides with the election of the current president. Now, I'm just telling you statistically what has been reported, and you can draw your conclusion there. In 1968, about 5 years after JFK was killed, John F. Kennedy and President Lyndon Johnson became president. And so in '68, when I was still in high school, there was the first federal hate crime statute came about. And so the legislation has evolved into affecting various classes, now sexual orientation and gender as well. And also, many states have produced or passed laws like the federal law to deal with hate crimes in their jurisdiction as well. And so it says the intent of hate crime laws is to prevent criminals from intentionally selecting classes of people committing crimes against them, such as battery, robbery, vandalism, or arson, any of those types of things. It's a form of intimidation. That's what it amounts to, okay? And you can look at some of these statutes for a second here. Let's look at what the state of Wisconsin says. Prohibits intentionally committing a crime against another and selecting the victim or their property in whole or in part because of the actor's belief or perception regarding the race, religion, color, disability, sexual orientation, national origin, or ancestry, whether or not the actor actually believes that this is correct, but the actions themselves make it pretty clear. I mean, you don't have to yell and say the name in order to be guilty of those kinds of things. So the key thing is just intentionally targeting a group. And so you can take a look at this in detail. And then the case of Wisconsin versus Mitchell, a 1993 case, which says that after some states created laws that increased the penalty for hate crimes, such as Florida, had some of the following points. A misdemeanor or the second degree is reclassified to a misdemeanor in the first degree. So what you begin to see is that when the hate part of it is added, it elevates crimes to a higher class, and you can end up receiving more time. Okay, and so you can take a look at this video on your own time, and you'll be able to see that. All right. So now let's talk about what did we learn here. Let's look at some key terms. So you can go and you can prepare for an understanding by, as I shared every week. This is one course that they have it in. I don't think they haven't put it in any other classes, but this was very beneficial and helpful to students to help them prepare for exams or get an understanding. Like the flashcards, and then it says applied to drunk driving cases. A person who is seated on the driver's seat with the ability to put the vehicle in motion is said to have physical control of the vehicle. So what is that called? That's physical control of a vehicle, and it tells you that. The next one, a substance that is substantially similar to the chemical structure of a Schedule 1 or 2 drug, such as like spice or K2. Again, we talk about this in that drugs and crime course, which are manufactured drugs, but similar to marijuana, and therefore are a controlled substance, and those are considered controlled substance analogs because they are made up drugs, chemical that are induced, put in the body and induce that individual into a what we're going on a trip or something like that. Occurs in instances where a person has the right or ability to control the item, but it's not on their person, and that's called constructive possession. We talked about that. And so you can go through each of these, and it will basically summarize what's in the module or the lecture to help you. But again, I caution you, don't overlook it because it helps you to prepare for, it's a review form. That's what I'm just kind of like giving you a taste of it now so you can be into the habit of that. Let's go down to the next one. This one is practice for drunk driving, and so you you can come down here. You can go to, let's see, I think it's trying to see how this, no, that's not it. Here it is. Oops. I'm trying to remember how this went, because I remember I looked at this before. Well, anyway, you could go into this and you can look at each of these scenarios and then look at the cases that are under, and then it gives you ideal answers for dealing with drunk driving and forced blood draws. Remember, I talked about the case of Missouri versus McNeely, and if you clicked on it, it will lead you to the case itself, and there it is right there. All right. And then think about your answer, and then download the document to see if you're on the right track. So try to see how you do first, and then come back and see how well. The key to these little exercise things is to give you the ability to be able to see just how much you have retained or understanding of the material that you studied. The last two, practice identifying the drug schedule, and this is a neat one here that as soon as it shows up, there we go, here it comes. For practice, okay, so you start the activity, and then what you do is match each of these categories with the correct drugs that have no acceptable medical use in the United States, probably would fit under Schedule 1. And then you go on drugs that have, and you go on down the list here. And then you submit it, and it'll tell you whether you got them right. If you didn't get it right, you keep going until you do get it right. So I'm not going to take the time to do it, but just because it connects doesn't necessarily mean it's correct. But then once you submit it, it'll tell you, for example, I'm going to show you something. Let me just connect. I'm not even going to think about it. I'm going to just show you what I'm talking about. I'm not even thinking about the answers to them. Okay, now, so I can check this to see how many I got right. Probably only one, maybe I was two, but okay. Your answer was almost right. You have 2 attempts, and so it tells you you can go back and try it again. And so the key thing is you eventually are going to get them right. Now, don't cheat. You can go back and look at it, but once again, what you want to do is try to figure out, by connecting the right ones, just how much you understand about the schedules and why these drugs are in certain categories that I talked about earlier. And then don't ever ignore this, because it is, I've said every week, and I can tell by the grades that some people get that they didn't hear me, is that they don't do the practice quiz. And when you go to it, according to the federal law, marijuana is a Schedule what drug? Okay. Quick triggered. Okay. And that is correct. And then it says, it reminds you, so you read this. It's considered to be a Schedule 1 with high potential abuse and no current accepted medical use. Except, remember, okay. Well, somebody says, well, it's used for glaucoma. I say, yeah, I hear you. I hear you. I hear you. You are a police officer, and you stop the motor vehicle for speeding. While standing along the open driver's side window, you smell marijuana coming from the vehicle. A search reveals marijuana in the center console. The driver claims that it's not theirs. You may still take enforcement action because the driver is in what? A, B, C, or D? Nope, it's going to be this one. Constructive occurs in instances where the person has the right or ability to control the term, but it's not on their person. See, you went, see, sometimes when you're taking these tests, you have to be careful. Don't overanalyze, okay? That's what you were guilty of on this one. You said, Somebody said, I started to do that. I said, well, then do it. And do you know, it's a rule in multiple choice exams. Yeah, a lot of people are guilty of that. But uh, one of the no-nos is when you get an answer, generally, is go back and read it later, and then read it over and over, and then change your answer. So many times you will come back and you'll say, I had it right at first. Yes, and that's the way it works. So let's do this last one here. It says, while searching a man who is under arrest for a warrant, you locate a substance discovered to be homemade with chemical properties similar to ecstasy. This substance is considered a what? A, B, C, or D? You say it is a Schedule 4 drug. I say it's a controlled substance analog because it's a homemade. See? Remember, we talked about that earlier, like spice, K2. And so, yep, that's why it said. See, lots of times they will give you a clue in there, but you have to pay attention to it. I'll do one more. Incident to a lawful arrest. You search Jane and find cocaine in her front left pants pocket. She claims it's not hers, while stating, they aren't my pants, although she was wearing them. You still arrest Jane because this is an example of what? Absolute. There's no, it's actual. It's actual. It's actual. Yeah, yeah. There's no absolute. It's either actual or constructive. There's no partial or absolute. It sounds like it, but yeah. And students get caught up in that. You have to remember some of the stuff. It sounds right. It did sound right, but that ain't right. That's not it. And so those are the things that you look at in terms of this. And so I am done with this, and I am going to give you a key phrase, DUI. That's what I want you to give me. You give me that, and you get your points for this week. Okay, I hope that this has helped you. Again, I can't state how important it is to do those little practice things, because those little practice things will help you to do well. Okay, you're welcome. Hope everything's going well with you. I know there's some things that you've been dealing with, but stay afloat. And all you guys out there, make sure that you get these assignments completed. The course is over 10 days from today, and there's no extension. Thank you. God is able. Amen. Yes, it is. I tell students that if they learn how to do that on their own, and I usually talk about that outside of class, but when a student brings it up, I address it. Yes, that's how I live my life. That's how I live my life. That's how the things that have been happening to me, even with the challenges, I still turn around. I use those 3 words, and that's the sum and substance of, I call, yes, I have my testimony I gave you in week 1, but through it all, it reduces itself back to those 3 words, God is able. Well, thank you. I'm going to say good night at this time. I've got some stuff I got to do here, and get it done tonight. So I'll see you next Tuesday, the 10th of December. And the 10th of December is a special day for me. I'll tell you about that next week. try to remember to tell you next week. And if I don't, and you're in class, just say, hey, what was special about December 10th? And I'll tell you about it. It happened in 1989. So we were, what, 89, 89, 99, 2009. Oh, 30 years. Nope, that's not it. It's not. 30 years ago, as of next week, that's when something happened to me that is very important. Yeah, it's 30 years. Yep, 89, 99, 2009. Yes. Whoa, wow. So I'll see you next week. And it wasn't marriage either. No, wasn't that either. So you're trying to get it. Come back next week, and then you'll get it. Have a good one. Talk to you guys soon. Bye.